Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining our JCU Webinar Series. My name is Roger Osborne, and I'll be your MC for this lunchtime webinar. I'm a lecturer in English and Writing here at JCU. But before we continue, I wish to acknowledge the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the first inhabitants of this country, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners and elders past and present of the land on which we stand today, wherever that might be. In the spirit of reconciliation, I also acknowledge the valuable contribution that Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples continue to make to James Cook University and the broader community. Now, this webinar is the latest in a series where we invite our top researchers and academics to share their experience with the local community outside the lecture theatre. It's my pleasure to introduce JCU's Associate Professor Robyn Glade-Wright, who will be presenting What Does Art Have to Do with Climate Change? Now, before we start, there's a bit of housekeeping to do, and that is to let you know that if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box that you should see down below you. Oh, there you go. There's a bit of a demonstration there for you. So just use that Q&A function if you have any questions. I'll be monitoring this function throughout the presentation, and I'll raise any questions for Robyn when appropriate. And that might mean if you have a question when there's a particular image that strikes you and you have a question, if that is in the Q&A box, I might just interrupt Robyn for just a brief second to give her a time to catch her breath and maybe say something to the image. But otherwise, we will have a discussion at the end of the presentation and take any questions from you all. So please use the Q&A box to do that. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Robyn Glade-Wright. Robyn is a practising contemporary artist and arts educator who has presented over 40 solo exhibitions in public and private galleries. In 2018, Robyn installed microplastics found in human embryo on the exterior of the Cairns Institute at JCU. If you didn't see that, there will be an image for you to look at sometime during the presentation. The work, created from 1,000 recycled plastic bottles, calls attention to the role humans have played in climate change and environmental pollution. Robyn lectures in art, philosophy of the arts, creativity, and innovation. So without further ado, I would like to invite Associate Professor Robyn Glade-Wright to conduct today's presentation. Thanks, Robyn.
And thank you very much, Roger. So what an interesting question. And what I think art has got to do with climate change is that the arts and humanities are recognised by climate communicators and researchers as being effective forms of communication that are compelling and novel and reveal the facts established in the sciences. So works of art enable ideas to be shared in a manner that involves our imagination, our emotions, and our intellect. Now, in my works of art, I respond to ideas such as the extinction of 150 species each day. The loss of species means that the beauty of the natural world is diminished, as are opportunities for relationships with other forms of life. This is of concern to us in the tropics, which features 2/3 of all known plant and animal species. Another idea that I find perturbing is the prediction that the weight of plastic debris in the world's ocean is likely to exceed that of marine creatures by 2050. So, to highlight the often unseen horror of environmental pollution and the impacts of climate change, I've created works of art such as Coast from 330 discarded cigarette lighters that were washed up and collected on far north Queensland beaches. Coast suggests that Australia is delineated by litter and that our beaches are solid rather than being pristine places to relax, swim, play, and have fun. So while beaches might be imagined to be clean and beautiful, environmental pollution is associated with big cities replete with industrial manufacture. Plastic pollution is not confined to the site of production, the region where it's used, or the site of disposal. Rivers carry plastic waste from land sources to the sea, accounting for 70% of ocean plastic debris. Waste plastic is distributed around the globe by the wind and ocean currents. In this series of work called Choke, I'm suggesting that we're choking on discarded floats, plastic tops, rope, all that have been washed up on the beach. And indeed, one piece over here is made from a piece of compressed plastic. Now, this is similar to a sedimentary rock. However, this material is composed of successive layers of plastic that have been laid down in the environment and compressed. Much of the plastic waste used in my work was purchased from Tangaroa Blue, an Australian-wide and international marine debris removal organisation who work with volunteers to remove loads of rubbish from our coast. And in this age of plastic, I have suggested time is measured in a currency of plastic pollution. And I've done so in this piece called Plastic Time. Now, time is a very interesting concept in relation to this pollution. It takes millions of years for crude oil to form in the ground. Oil can be pumped from the ground and shipped to refineries in a few days. The refined oil can then be transported to factories and made into items such as plastic knives, forks, and straws that might be used once before they're discarded. And despite plastic's durability, around 50% of all plastic is only used once before it's thrown away. Petrochemical plastics are virtually indestructible. Scientists report that these plastics don't decompose. Instead, over a period of 500 to 1,000 years, they break up into smaller and smaller pieces. So if we think of the time it takes for oil to form, which is millions of years, it's remarkable that it can be made into plastic items, which might be used once and thrown away in a few short weeks. And then, as waste, the plastic pollutes the land, air, and sea for the next 1,000 years. So, in the word dump, I've attempted to reference rubbish that's illegally dumped in our oceans. Alarmingly, of the 8.3 million tonnes of plastic ever created, still exists, and 3/4 of this plastic is waste. Only 9% has been recycled, 12% incinerated, and 79% is deposited in landfill or the natural environment. In the work Sea Smog that I installed here in the Cairns Institute building, I have represented some of the billions of tiny microplastic pieces from car tyres, synthetic clothing, drink bottles and plastic wrap that are washed into the sea. These plastic pieces are suspended under the surface of the water and circulate in a smog-like cloud. In the waterways and in the sea, microplastics attract toxic chemical hitchhikers. And this toxic mix enters the food chain when it is consumed by plankton and other marine creatures, causing disease and cell death. The microplastic contamination progresses through the food chain, arriving in food sold for human consumption. And this is suggested in Lambton Soup that quotes Andy Warhol's famous Campbell soup cans of 1962. However, on the front of each can, I've listed the number of microplastics the cans contain. So this work of art brings out something that's interesting and curious about the nature of works of art. We can learn from art in a different manner than other forms of communication. If I tell you that there are microplastics in our food and in our cans of soup, you might be disappointed. However, when an image of soup states the microplastic content, as I have here, you may be perturbed to a greater degree. Now, talking about perturbing ideas, I attempted to depict the most horrendous outcome of plastic pollution that I could imagine. And as Roger mentioned earlier, I produced this piece called Microplastics Found in Human Embryo. I thought that the damaging impacts of plastic on an unborn child would be the worst outcome I could possibly envisage. When I wrote the didactic sign to accompany the piece, I was dismayed to read that microplastics can cross the blood-brain barrier, the gastronomical tract, and the placenta, altering gene expression, causing cell death and harm. And this was truly shocking. It's quite something, isn't it, when one's own work upsets one? Now, in some of the work I've made, such as Disquiet, I've used buoys from the pearling industry that were washed up on the shore, and they carry messages such as, is it too late? The piece Red Tide laments the death of millions of fish due to a severe red toxic algal bloom that impacted the coast of Chile and Argentina in 2016, crippling the fishing industry and the livelihoods of the people working in that industry. The warming climate fueled this devastating outbreak. In this work of art, I drew dead fish with pastels on a plastic buoy, which had been washed up on the coast of far north Queensland. And as the climate warms, cyclones are predicted to increase in frequency and strength. In this cyclone, we're confronted with the eye of the storm. So this work is made from garden materials and white paint. And let's talk about the nature of art here. Works of art are not real. This is not a real cyclone. However, works of art relate to life and they engage our imagination and emotions. They may convince us to think about how we live and the impacts of our life on the future. In the digital prints, A Hand in Coral Bleaching and Body Coral, I've conflated human bodies with the drama of bleached coral to point to human responsibility as the cause of the problem. I've attempted to suggest that our veins in our bodies are ossified like bleached coral to garner further concern around coral bleaching. Overconsumption is made from paper mache, vegetation and paint. It appears to be a container laden with cargo floating on the horizon. And this is a sight we often see when looking at the sea here in Cairns. The ship navigates between coral cays within the World Heritage Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. The warming water beneath overconsumption's hull conceals a tale of horror. In the past decade, a third of the once thriving, vibrant and multicoloured coral reef formed over the past 17 to 25,000 years has died. Revered as one of the natural wonders of the world, the Great Barrier Reef quietly bleaches and dissolves, leaving a desolate, bone-grey calcium graveyard that can no longer sustain a once thriving and complex ecosystem of vivid and diverse marine life. In financial terms, it's cost-effective. to import consumer goods to Australia, resulting in 11,000 transits by ships annually through the marine park, despite the risk of damage to the reef. So the ship is a menacing reminder of the greenhouse gases generated by manufacture, transport, and trade, all fueled by consumerism. Greenhouse gases have accumulated in the atmosphere at an accelerating rate, and one that has outpaced the Earth's capacity to adapt and absorb the excess, warming the planet and the water while sounding a death knell to the reef. I sometimes recycle materials in my works of art. The reef in overconsumption had a former life in a piece called Exodus. And now I'm moving along to some of my recent work. I've been thinking about birds, and in no eggs hatched, I've inserted plastic rubbish in the yolks of transparent resin eggs. Sadly, scientists predicted 50 years ago that it is unlikely that any marine birds will remain uncontaminated by synthetic pollutants. Today, 90% of marine bird species have ingested plastic, and 95% of the individuals within these species have been affected. I'm also working on a piece which I might title Spinning Out. It's a plasticized form of DNA. And I'm working, and that piece will be exhibited in Port Douglas in the Call of the Running Tide in September this year. I'm also working on a dress for the Wearable Art Awards that will be held in Townsville in July. And this dress, I think I'll title Too Hot to Handle, Reef Distress. And I've had enormous fun. I've always wanted to emulate brain coral, and I'm hoping that from the audience, that will be an effective rendition of the bleached coral. So in conclusion, what I think art has got to do with climate change is that it is a provocative form of communication, as it can engage our imagination, intellect, and emotion in novel and informative ways. Art can speak of the past, reveal the present, and point to a possible future. Works of art can bring to light facts established in the sciences and present them in a novel and compelling form that can instigate reflection. Art can provoke new ways of seeing, and this can create new knowledge. This may help us transform the way we live so that we address the complex environmental challenges we face. The works of art shown today reveal the horror of our throwaway plastic society. They attempt to garner foresight intelligence and to shake us from our complacency so that we can form a sustainable relationship with our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robyn. There are questions coming through, so I'm just going to give you just a bit of time to catch your breath and invite anybody out there who has questions to send them through to the Q&A function. I have a few already. Robyn's just had a bit of a drink to get ready to answer the questions or have any discussions. I might give you one. So I've got this Q&A function, but there's also a question that's come via email through another avenue to me, and it is a question about where can people see your work in the future. So Jackie has asked where and when her next exhibition will be. So you have said there is a Port Douglas exhibition, but as far as where else that people can see your work, can you answer that question, please?
Absolutely. So as it happens, on Monday, I'm travelling down to Maryborough near Brisbane because Dr. Barbara Dover and I have an exhibition called Disquiet, which will be shown in Grotesque's Art Space Gallery, and that'll run from the 7th of May to the 27th of July. So it's been a touring exhibition. It's been shown in Townsville and here at Northside. So it's been travelling over the last few months.
All right, I hope everyone's taken a note of that. And if anybody from those towns are listening, there is an opportunity for you to have a close-up look at. Look, for me, it's quite something hearing your words. You know, it's catastrophic. It's awful. It's horrifying. But at the same time, we're hearing those words and looking at these beautiful works of art that you've created. There's a question in there about language, words and works of art, and how they might work the same but differently. How might the way that we interact with a work of art like you created communicate? And this might relate to a question that kind of came up in your conclusion, but one of our attendees asked as well. To what extent do you think art can be effective in societal change? So that effect that we might have all been having, listening to your words, but also looking at these works of art. What do you think about that effect that art can have on an individual, but also more broadly in society?
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I'm very optimistic about the fact that arts and images can contribute to our understanding, and reflection can change our thinking and perhaps change governments and so forth. I guess I'm thinking of devastating images, such as the young child in Vietnam that was burned by napalm. And in the same year that that image was made available to people, even though people perhaps understood that war was bad, the Vietnam War was ended and American people chose to withdraw from Vietnam. So I'm inordinately optimistic that the arts have got the capacity to change the way we think, and collectively we can change what we do.
It's interesting. So for those of you out there who are listening or viewing, I'm quite lucky to be here in Cairns with Robyn and to see not only the products of her work. I've seen the effect it has had on her hands. So for me, I type a lot of things, but Robyn works with her hands, and the effect that it has on her physically is quite something. But it's really good to be able to see her talk about these works of art as they come into being, and we've seen some works in progress there as well. I'm just looking at there is a request from somebody who has been, they're working on using recycled material for art themselves, and they have made a request to be able to use your words because they would like to quote you as, I guess that's a request for permission. This event is being recorded, so that's where you can go back and watch and listen again. But I guess Robyn, if anybody wanted to email you, your email address might be some way to contact you for any further questions beyond today. Is that okay?
And we've been supported by people such as Hannah for this webinar. Hannah has the script, and so I'm more than happy for that information to be made available. And it might be interesting for people working in the arts that one does have to, be cognate of what's going on in the world. And I certainly do read a lot of science and a lot of philosophy about the arts, but I'm inordinately grateful to the research that scientists generate. But at the same time, as is the case with the marine birds, knowing that 50 years ago, scientists knew that they wouldn't, that they were going to be polluted by these plastic waste. You know, it's just disappointing that we haven't been able to glean this information. So I certainly think that the arts are a way of being able to respond to, you know, the changes that are impacting the beautiful world. And I certainly see art as being a way of trying to conserve it.
Okay, thank you. There are a lot of questions coming in now as we speak, and people reflect on what you've said and what they have seen. So I'm just going to go. I'm just going to go through as many as we can. We've got quite a bit of time to do this, and so please feel free if there is a question that comes out of into your mind from any of the conversation that we have, to drop it in, and we'll aim to get through as many of these questions as possible. So I'm just going through them one by one here. Emma Small asks, do you think there is enough emotional reaction to art made with recycled materials that it could become a new art movement? Of course, materials have often been reused for economic purposes, but I mean an art movement of recycled materials for the political purpose. There's a question for you.
Look, I very much hope so. And I must say that I'm continuing to collect materials. We do have descriptions around eco-art, environmental aesthetics. So I think that this form of socially engaged art is a growing area. I think that in this contemporary life we lead, which is ever so connected, as the world becomes somehow smaller, and we all know that that has certainly been brought to bear with the impacts of COVID, I think that more people are keen to work together to try and solve this problem. And I think that there's no issue in using materials that are rubbish. What I think is important is that it is how those materials are used. Now, apologies if I'm kind of talking for a little bit too long here, but this is pieces made of plastic bottles. And as it happens, just down to my left here, I've got another big box of plastic bottles, because I'm thinking about these eggs and making this big egg out of these plastic bottles. What I think is important is the aesthetic of the work. I undertook some research in relation to people's reception to microplastics found in human embryo. And people said that it was beautiful and that it glistened. So when the wind blew it and in the morning sun, it actually glistened. And there was something about the work that was quite attractive. What I'm trying to talk about in some of these works is the aesthetic. So all of these old pieces of plastic, all of these floats, I had such a lovely time. And I'm not trying to give you too much of a ploy here about the subjects that we teach at James Cook University. When we learn about colour theory, we know about complementary colours. And some of these ideas underpin some of this work. So here we have a complementary colour harmony. Sometimes the work looked a lot like a mandala or something else that I'd seen in the past. And I just enjoy all of this process of using these materials in a way that I hope is aesthetically pleasing. Now, sometimes I've talked about my work in terms of subversive beauty. And what I mean here is that I try and make my work appear beautiful and attractive so that people will tarry with it, so that people will think. But underneath the attractive surface is a rather disturbing message. So when it comes to answering the question that has been asked, do you think it's possible that using recycled materials and plastic waste might be something that could become a sort of theme or many people might become involved with. Well, I think that so long as people are impacting in the world, making work that's communicating in the world, that it's great to use those materials and not to be using materials that are causing more harm. I think what's important, though, is the manner in which you use the materials. And so these things have to be thought about very carefully. And I want to mention that I struggle with my work, that often I spend many hours trying to make my work work. I found it a little difficult to try and make a piece like spinning out. The whole DNA thing was somewhat of a engineering complexity to me. But after several trials, over several months, I managed to make a double helix. And then I started to look at the colours, and sometimes the plastic rubbish, the plastic waste is all, mixed up and the colours aren't attractive. So I decided I might look at using silver. And then after that, I decided I might paint it blue. And now it's a whole combination of colours. And I have used many, many colours because I've used materials like spray paint. The work is loaded with colours. I'm sorry, it's a poor image that I've taken here, but it's that richness and that beauty of the work that I hope will mean that the work transcends the rubbish that I've used to make it.
Thanks, Robyn. You've given me a few things to say there, particularly when I first introduced, when I came to Cairns and I first met Robyn, and I was explaining to my family who I've met and what they do, and in describing Robyn's work, I told my family that all Robyn's work is rubbish, which is a lot of truth to that, and what she's just said has kind of given me permission. What you've just said there over the last few minutes, Robyn, has answered a lot of questions that have cropped up. So I'm going to make sure that I answer some of them. I'll pick the ones that you've already answered. Which this one might come in here. It's talking about the process. Jacqueline Scotcher has asked, what usually is the starting point for a work of art? Is it the climate fact, or is it a particular found material? So I guess that's a chicken and egg story. We might think about it in that way. Are you looking for something to create a work of art, or do you pick up some rubbish and from that create something?
Actually, it can go in both directions. When I collected all of these, I purchased these buoys from the pearling industry. One of the things that I wanted to do was to make a necklace for a building, and I wanted to make a pearl necklace. I actually didn't manage to create that work of art in a manner that I thought was successful, partly because I didn't have the ladders and permission to hang a big necklace on a building. And because of the complexity, I had to change the work of art. But in that piece of work, the materials suggested the nature of the work. And at other times, I read something. So I've been working a little bit on these mercury, and on the idea that mercury is so damaging to the plants and animals that we share the planet with, and ultimately ourselves. And for my sins, and I don't quite know why it seems that I've been making works that are larger and larger. Now this little silver mercury-looking fish is something that I made using bread dough, because when yeast rises, it has a rounded form that might be something like a mercury. But what I'm planning to do is to make these large animals that appear to be dead, and to make them very, very smooth and silver, and I'm going to exhibit them on these pallets, which I have here in my office. So pallets are used in transport to take consumer goods and goods around, and I'll use a stack of these pallets as the plinth for these mercury-looking animals. Most of the works of art that I make run a year or two behind my thinking. I often think of a work of art, but because of the exciting things I do working here at the university and teaching and having PhD students, I'm often a lag of about a year behind the work. And so in this piece about mercury and the impacts of mercury, the idea has suggested the piece. So that's a different way of working to the boys that I talked about earlier.
Thank you. I'm scrolling through, trying to get to everybody's question. Susan Mildren, everybody's thanking you for your presentation, and there's lots of very kind comments for you and your work. Suzanne is interested to hear what your work journey has been to this point. Have you always focused on environmental challenges with your art?
Oh, no, that's a good question. When I was in art school, I made a piece of work which was about the death of fish. And when you start making works of art, perhaps they can be quite rudimentary. And I remember using some physical fish bones. So I think that there was always an element to the work. But when I moved into studying at a PhD level, I had started to look at extinction of Tasmanian plants, and often you might change what you do following your PhD, but it actually set up a way of being in the world that really helped me. I think that the PhD enabled me to understand that relationships are incredibly important, and I have a great reverence for the natural environment. And so I understand now that I perhaps have been brought along to the world to nurture and to create. So I'm really fortunate that I can teach, because I really enjoy helping people to create works of art. I think that enabling people to be impacting is a really important one. But just to segue back to the question, I guess the PhD gave me an opportunity to focus on what was important to me, and I've been so fortunate to be able to continue that focus following the PhD.
Thanks. And there's more calls to people want to see your work, Robyn. There's a question here that says, are any of your works on public display apart from exhibitions? So is there, if people, are there any ways where people might walk around the Cairns campus and see your work, or at other places where your work is either permanently displayed or occasionally displayed in public?
I run a small gallery. It's a fabulous corridor here in Cairns, and I often display works there. The gallery is a student exhibition, and one of my master's students has her work there. But some of the institutions have some of my work, but there isn't a place that is where my work is permanently displayed at this stage.
All right, there you go. So we'll start a campaign to see more of Robyn Glade-Wright's work in public. Mahalina Goros-Lockie asks, do you think works that celebrate the environment, that is portraying beautiful subject matter, have an equal impact on viewers in terms of caring for the environment? I think there's actually another question about beauty coming up here, and then there was also another question further up that was I think it was a question about language, and it was like the idea of the beauty and the grotesque. So there's lots of questions about the impact that beauty has on us as human beings, but I guess they're sort of combining those questions. Can the grotesque also be beautiful? Is there something in that aesthetic that I can compel you to give some sort of an answer to?
Well, now it's a very interesting thing, and the great thing about being human and being unique is that we all have a different aesthetic, and this is jolly brilliant because it means that everybody makes work of art that speaks to their own longings and their own intuition. And it actually seems to me that I am locked into this capacity to make things that have this subversive beauty. I don't want to say that my work is beautiful, but many people do say that. Beauty was something that I studied in my PhD because, you know, beauty also has kind of a negative side, you know. Is it something that is banal, or, you know? So when people said my work was beautiful, I was actually wondering what exactly was going on. But beauty isn't the only aesthetic. So many people can create the grotesque. I'm probably not one of them, but each individual has to make the work of art that speaks to their own volition. So that's part of the question. I'm going to answer the question also in another way, and I'm not quite sure if this is what the person meant, but maybe they can clarify, Roger. When I read information about the arts and climate communication, I see people from, say, psychology or climate communicators that are in different fields saying that the very best sort of art is art that shows the beauty of nature. And I must admit, I haven't agreed with some of what is coming through. And all I can say is that I've undertaken research about the efficacy of my art. And, you know, I certainly think that some of my art is grotesque and, sorry, it's a grotesque idea, but in a beautiful form. So I don't actually agree with some of what I read in climate communication literature about the fact that works of art need to represent the beauty of nature. But I absolutely believe that all individual artists have an opportunity to speak their truth, and that can be about beauty if that's the way they need to make their work.
There might be a follow-up question about, there's a few questions about beauty that have come up, and I think that is the experience that we've all had in contemplating these beautiful images, but the message that they're conveying is also troubling us as well. And so it's really good that you're forced to think about these things, the concepts that we use to understand the world, or as anonymous attendee is how it's come through. Anonymous attendee has asked, do you have any views on Dostoevsky's idea that beauty will save the world?
Well, I guess that it hasn't happened so far. So we can say that beauty has been an important idea since the ancients contemplated the nature of life, and perhaps we can say that people see beauty as being important. We all want to have beautiful spouses or partners and beautiful children and live in beautiful places. But beauty hasn't seemed to be a driving force and one that can change society as I see it.
So there's your answer to that one, anonymous attendee. More for us to think about. it would seem so easily if we could just hold up beauty and change the world. But yep, the world is not working like that for us in the past, in the present, in the future. But still work to be done for, like, there is an encouragement for everyone out there to be creative as well in what Robyn does, in what she says. So for anybody, for anybody taking on any projects of themselves with using recycled items to create something that has a message, but also conveys beauty. Okay, we might not save the world, but one little bit at a time is the way that we can do it. What did you say? Everyone has their own aesthetic. So I think that's an invitation to everyone to embrace your own aesthetic and work with it. All right, still more questions for you, Robyn. How are you going?
Oh, good.
Tanya Chapman asks, do you source objects for your work through beach and bushwalks, or just through Tangaroa and other such groups? And does that help create your inspiration? So perhaps there might be a question about your engagement with that activity or people involved in activity and in the way you think about the art that you create.
Yes, thank you. And Roger, I'll come back to stewardship as well as another thought, perhaps after I've answered this question. Look, I'm afraid to say that I am always collecting rubbish wherever I go. And because I know that my new DNA piece that I'm working on could value from this thing that I found in the car park, and people here at work might notice that I come into work with bottles that I've collected and so forth. So sometimes I collect the rubbish. Another more or less funny one in relation to the 1,000 bottles that I used in microplastics found in embryo. I had to go, what my students said was dump diving into recycling bins in venues around Cairns. And they seemed to think that that was quite funny, that I would be dump diving to collect the rubbish. So as well as buying rubbish, I collect rubbish, and nowhere is safe. So, you know, the car park in the supermarket is a great source. All of these places are places where I can source rubbish. Now, I also just remembered the idea of stewardship, and some theorists talk about the fact that when we go to an art gallery, we might see a beautiful urn, and we might be influenced to create a similar beautiful object and to replicate the beauty of the world. So Elaine Scarry talks about beauty as something that can instigate replication and stewardship. Now, whether that's of objects in the art gallery or things in the natural world, there is certainly an idea around beauty in relation to stewardship. So that's another idea that, you know, speaks of the power of beauty.
And another call for us to engage with the world ourselves, which I think across from listening to Robyn and her images and some of the responses that have been coming through, there's certainly some people at work already. Robyn, Caroline Hood, really inspiring. I'm working on developing ideas for using marine debris that are collected on our beach cleanups rather than sending them to landfill. I think it's a great medium to engage people in the issue of marine debris through art rather than the usual depressing images we are used to seeing. Not a question, I suppose, but certainly calls for a comment.
And I think that working with community in these sorts of projects, if people have opportunity to run projects with community groups, that's a brilliant way of highlighting, you know, different things that are going on. I mean, I didn't talk about turtles today, but I have made work about turtles, and we're so fortunate that we have beautiful turtles in this region, but when they eat plastic, they make gas when they try and digest the plastic, and the turtle rises to the surface and they can't dive down to get food, and they bake in the sun and they die. You know, so it's really really valuable if you have opportunity to work with community groups to, you know, look at some of these ideas. At this stage, I don't do a lot of that sort of work because I'm teaching here, but working with community, I think, is a really important way that we can work in the creative arts.
Somebody who seems to know something about that turtle, also anonymous attendee, has asked, the turtle at the hotel, is that the one? Is that still displayed publicly?
Yes, there is a turtle. Oh, there we go. I think I've been called out. The Bailey Hotel in Cairns has a piece of my work on public display. Apologies that I had forgotten about that. I guess I'm so involved in trying to make my new works of art, I forgot about that piece that's on public display. And that turtle is full of these plastic floats from the fishing industry that washed up on the beach. And so the floats suggest the business that the turtle had floated to the surface.
All right, there you go, anonymous attendee. It seems like I'm not sure if anonymous attendee is exactly the same person, but anonymous attendee is asking a few questions, and there are a few to go. We've got about 9 minutes left, so we're doing good with time. If there is space for just a few more questions, if they are to come. So I've got two more after this last one, perhaps from anonymous attendee. Are there any particular eco artists that you find inspiring?
Many eco artists that I find inspiring. I've been very fortunate to exhibit in group exhibitions. So I mentioned the Call of the Running Tide in Port Douglas on a local level. But of course, I mean, at the Venice Biennale, some of the works of art, you know, have been breathtaking. One of the works of art by Hung was a work of art where there were some pools and there was a path across the pool. And when you walk across the pool, it sank. And so the water started to come towards your feet. And it was this really terrible feeling of being inundated by water. And of course, it was speaking about the rise of water and the position that meant for islander nations, you know, where the islands were being inundated by the sea. So there are so many wonderful people working, many artists.
And I guess that's an invitation for us then to look for those artists who are similar, create similar works to yours, Robyn, and that we can find them in all sorts of places, hotels and other public spaces. I'm going to continue. I think I've yes, it sounds like I've got most of the questions to this point. And they're still coming in, Robyn. People are still curious. Tom Bristow asks, do you identify your arts practice with the material turn? And Tom's put that in quotes. Our students know this recent turn as a reaction to crises of representation, like post-structuralism. You wish to represent science, but also human action, yet the human is absent in your works. Is that intentional?
Well, that's very interesting, particularly looking at a piece of work like this. I think that in works of art, people see the intent of the artist and the artist's commitment to the subject. So at one point, you're looking at a piece of art that is stationary, but it represents unfinished thinking. And the audience to the work is looking at the work and imagining what the artist might have meant, and also imagining what it means to them. So something I haven't mentioned is that art provides a space for people to contemplate these complex questions without being told how to think and what to do. So the arts become something like a prop in a game of make-believe. They're not real, but they do enable us to think deeply about subjects in a way that we can take our own time, and also without like a political overlay. So the idea that Tom's suggesting, that the human is absent from the work, yeah, I think that we're intrigued by works of art, in fact, because that a human has used their acumen to create the work. Does that sound like a bit of a an answer in a way of?
Oh yes, it is. It is an answer. Perhaps Tom will
come back with another.
Yes, we'll seek you out and interrogate you further on that question. But I see we are coming close to time, and there is I think I've attended to everyone's questions or combined them with others in order for you to continue speaking to us. There is one more though that I guess it kind of relates to one of my loaded questions that I had ready for you, and I didn't get an opportunity to ask them. We'll see if I do get to ask any of those questions. But Anik Goldenberg, once again, thanks for an inspiring presentation. Anik asks how you assess the effect or impact of your work.
Oh, now there is a good question. And assess it in terms, so that's going to take a little bit of unpacking. Do I assess it?
You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Do I assess it in terms of whether I like it? Do I assess in terms of whether other people like it? Or do I assess it in terms of whether it has impact? And I think the way I assess my work is in relation to impact. So when I have undertaken research and ethics to ask people if my work may have influenced their behaviour, and they've come back to me and they've said, yes, they're not buying plastic coat hangers anymore, they're buying wooden coat hangers, I think, yes, it was worth putting 1,000 bottles together. Yes, I guess it depends on, I think that I keep on setting new challenges for my work. Occasionally I look back at slides and I go, oh, you know, a couple of years after I've made the work, and I think, oh, that doesn't look too bad. At the time, I think I'm always pushing forward and trying to make the new work. So, how does that sound?
Look, that sounds like an ongoing project for any artist. Look, with 1 minute to go, I'd like to thank thank our audience for attending and for all of these great answers, these great questions that have stimulated such a good conversation with Robyn. And I'd also like to thank Robyn for delivering this webinar for us, but also creating these works of art for us to see today in these images, but also in other places. And if you'd like to know more about design and creative arts, there's a list of of courses that are available. So that gives you an idea of what all of these questions that you're asking there might be answers in design foundation, information design, visual arts, image and imagination, philosophy of the arts and reflective practitioner, introduction to creativity and innovation, digital imaging, research and ethics, professional practice. If you are interested, please go and have a look at the subjects there. Right, we're right up on time now. So thank you, Robyn. To our audience, there is a post survey that you might like to fill out for us. So the link is going to open up in the browser after this webinar concludes. And I have to announce that, and there's another webinar coming up. There we go. On the 13th of May with JCU's Dr. Rachel Hay on adopting technology, how women play a critical role in agriculture. So please visit JCU Webinars to join us for any future webinars. And let me take the opportunity one more time to thank Associate Professor Robyn Glade-Wright for the presentation that she's delivered today. Thanks. I hope to see you all around.
Thank you all. Thank you.